All right. Well, Kim Hansen Petroni, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that our paths crossed. We've got an incredible wives care ministry, and Gigi Hopkins is our wives care director. And so she got us connected. And I know you guys go back a ways with your mutual kind of AppSats training and all of that. And we won't get into all your training. There's way too many letters after your name for us to do all of that. But I do want to dive in to this topic of betrayal, trauma, healing, but especially as it pertains to those whose marriages are either over or lifeless. And so, before we get to that specific topic, can you let our listeners and viewers just know a little bit about you, your own background and story, and kind of how you got into this space of work that you're doing now?
Sure, sure. Well, way back when I graduated college with my undergraduate degree, I got a degree in psychology, and then I got a master's in counseling. And I knew all that time frame that I really wanted to use. It was a gift that God had given me. I could feel like the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I could feel the Holy Spirit just really working in an environment to help people. And after I got my master's degree, I got married and had four children, homeschooled them. So I took a diversionary path from any type of counseling. And about 16 years into my marriage, I discovered I had the typical D-Day and discovered that there was a duplicate life transpiring in my home. And during that time frame, we tried to do the standard. It was years ago, so we didn't have quite as many opportunities for healing. And we tried our best, and it just did not work. And I had a very specific moment where I felt the Lord tell me to give my husband back to God, and that God would have to work on him. And so I filed for divorce. During that same time frame, right after my divorce, I was also in a big church, and there was another woman, pastor's wife, pastor died unexpectedly. His wife was very similar to me. She had 5 kids. She was homeschooling. I had 4 kids that we were homeschooling, right about the same age. And the incredible amount of support that I saw her receive in the church was unreal. She had casseroles being brought to her. She had Facebook, GoFundMe things, all kinds of stuff set up for her. And while she didn't have her husband anymore, I didn't have my husband anymore, and I didn't have anything. In fact, I couldn't even really discuss kind of what was going on in my life because nobody understood it. And that piqued my curiosity as to why, if she doesn't have a husband, I don't have a husband, why am I being treated so unbelievably different? So the next step was I decided that once I got myself some good help and support, I decided that I wanted to look into AppSats community because I felt very supported by them. I was Googling one night and just typed in your sexually addicted spouse, and Barb Steffen came up and the AppSets community. And after that, it was kind of history. The first training I did was a Door of Hope training, and that teaches women to facilitate betrayal trauma groups. In that training, we read an article about not being a casserole widow and our betrayal trauma. And I took that piece, that nugget, and I just kind of started traveling down the path that I felt the Lord leading me down, which was, I'm not a casserole widow. I didn't get any casseroles, and I am a widow. What do we do for those women in my space? So years later, my divorce was very, very messy, and it incurred a lot of court trauma. And after my first trial, during all of this is all kind of happening at the same time, I walked out of a 2-day trial and just decided this does not need to happen to another woman alone. So I dug in and I just determined that I was going to try to make a space for women who are going through divorce and betrayal trauma all at once
Hmm.
and figure out how I could support them.
That's good. For some of our listeners that may not be familiar with AppSats, can you share just what that is?
Yeah. The AppSets community was formed by Barb Steffens, who co-wrote Your Sexually Addicted Spouse with Marsha Means. And she actually came up with the concept that betrayal trauma symptoms are similar to PTSD symptoms. Now we would call them complex PTSD symptoms. And her goal, Barb Steffens' goal, was to create a community called the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. We shorten it to APSATS. Basically, we support partners and are trained to support partners going through betrayal trauma with compulsive or problematic sexual behaviors in their relationships.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you're speaking into this particular space of betrayal trauma healing, because um, I think there's a growing and have been a growing number of resources
Sure.
for those who are in marriages where restoration is being attempted. And so then there's resources for the couple, there's resources for the individuals. But sometimes it seems like if that quote unquote goal of restoration is not achieved, or if that's not even attempted, the fallout is just like collateral damage.
Sure.
Can you talk about how that the ending of a marriage, or maybe even like I said earlier, the lifelessness of a marriage? In other words, maybe they're still technically married, but this marriage is really dead. What kind of additional traumas does that even bring into a wife's healing on top of whatever just the betrayal was itself?
I'm a put that into two different spaces because we have the dead marriage and then we have the divorce marriage.
Sure.
Divorce. The dead marriage kind of puts women typically in, and I say women just because it's kind of usually what we deal with, but
Yeah.
women into a space of daily survival. It's hard to heal and move forward from the trauma because you're still in the space that you're living with him. And if there's any kind of abuse or continuing patterns of behavior, it really keeps the wife stuck in a space of survival. How do I take care of my kids today? Do I need to get up and go to work? What do I need to do? It's just this kind of daily, hourly, moment by moment function. It's very debilitating on their physical sense, the agitation that their nervous system accommodates on a daily basis is astronomical, and it really causes long-term pain for the wives. Usually, once they kind of get past that dead space and they've come to a point in time when they can exit, a lot of the physical problems that they have, which we would also call somatic because they're related to the emotions, diminish, if not totally subside. Um, if there's a woman that's in that dead relationship, the focus is truly to be, how can I get myself a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better day by day, listening to podcasts, doing workbooks if you can, giving yourself space and rest, time to heal. If all of those, just take it as I'm going to use this space to kind of get to a different level as best that I can. For a woman who's divorcing, the layers are a little bit different because not only do you have trying to recover from betrayal trauma, we call that foggy brain too, where they're trying to come out of this unbelievable experience that they have just with their husband, but now we're asking them to learn a whole new language of court, legal, documentation. And they're having to go into an immediate survival space of fighting for something for the rest of their life with a language they don't know about, they don't understand the system, and they're still hurting down here. So they're both really hard spaces for wives to live.
So let's talk then about the wife who is either in the process of divorce or has already divorced. Um, let's start first with just kind of the high level understanding of just what exactly is betrayal trauma and what are kind of the major stages of healing in that. And then maybe we can start getting down into the layers of what does that look like, maybe that's unique for a wife that is going through divorce or has divorced. And then I'd like for us to go towards what does hope look like in all of that?
Because
Because
there is hope, I
everything here just feels so heavy, and it just feels almost as if, how do you keep from just drowning completely?
From an APSAT standpoint, our concept of healing for women who've experienced betrayal trauma, kind of short, my definition is just women who've experienced that their person they trust, their person in their life has deceived them through either problematic sexual behaviors of some nature. It could be pornography, it could be affairs, it could be any level of a life that is not made clear and true to their partner. It can be financial betrayal too. It can be any of those items. So, in order to heal from betrayal trauma, APSATS divides it up into three spaces. We have safety and stabilization, and then grief and mourning, and then finally is like reconnecting with the outside world. With women trying to divorce and heal from betrayal trauma, they get stuck in the safety and stabilization space because they're not stable and they're not safe always. So they have, I mean, they might have little pockets of space where they can get safe. But if you're walking into an attorney's office, you're very unsafe. There's no safety there. And it's hard to stabilize your own nervous system when you're in this space. So when I work with women, I work really diligently to try to get them to access their nervous system and settle it. Notice what they're feeling, give them tons of tools, similar tools that we would use in the betrayal trauma community. How do you handle triggers? But to really get them to invest in themselves in those spaces. The grief and mourning, I term it, it's like a trickle grief. So if they've got safety and stabilization that they're trying to really kind of handle, they actually have to experience grief at the same time they're trying to get stabilized. And the best way for me to describe that to them is that it just kind of comes, it's either going to be like a small drip from your spigot in the kitchen sink. Every once in a while, we got to turn it on full blast and we turn it off. But by the time they get to the end of the process, they're not, if the divorce is finalized or if they've extracted themselves from a partner, they don't fall apart and grieve, and because they've done it for so long over the period of time. The reconnecting, that third space for them after they got safety and stabilization, the safety and stabilization gets kind of murky for most of the process. Grief and mourning, they kind of incorporate that through the whole space. The reconnecting, actually, this works really well. Super exciting, because if they're in the safety and stabilization trying to get themselves settled, there's so many groups that will help them get that so they can learn how to reconnect on the far end. So for them, it's kind of like a ball of yarn all at once. They do it all at the same time. It doesn't have real clean, defined steps because it's
Mhm.
just the way it is. But they still follow those three categories. Does that help?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as you're saying that, there's one thing that I want to address specifically because it seems to me, and I could be wrong on this. Hey, I'm a guy talking here, right? So I need you to totally correct me here, Kim, if I'm wrong. It seems to me like there is also maybe a different layer for the woman who is going through divorce and exiting a part of her life where it seems to me like anybody that's married, husband and wife, a large part of your world, your identity, kind of who you are, is wrapped into that relationship. What is that like for those whose marriages end? And how does that play into also part of this overall healing? I mean, there's the betrayal piece, but I may be talking about a little bit of extra here that's saying this is an identity piece where there's a loss that's happened. And I know that grief and mourning can be part of that, but is this distinct from those who are having their marriage restored?
That's actually a really good point. You're 100% spot on with it too, because yes, when you are like, for my situation, I'm a stay-at-home mom homeschooling my kids for 16 years, hadn't worked in a long time. And when I got to the end, I was like, oh, what am I going to do now?
Mm,
I can't be what I thought God wanted me to be, which was a homeschooling mom. I can't do that anymore. So now what doors do I try to find for myself to go through? It's an identity crisis. So when I work with clients and when clients kind of work through this process, we try to pull out the things that they were used to be good at, those dreams that they used to have, spaces that they were not maybe able to tap into before, and we try to channel those and figure out what they excel at from an education standpoint, because they've got to get a whole new career, whole new future focus. If they don't have financial stability with a divorce, it's a crisis for them. The biggest crisis that I find extremely frustrating from a widowed person is the lack of support that our church community provides these women. It's not hard to help them out financially or just really give them a space to sit and grieve and feel supported as they try to figure out what they're going to do with the rest of your life. That is a really good point that you
yeah.
bring.
Well, and without maybe chasing this rabbit too far, you've mentioned a couple times the church response, and what would be some of the reasons you think that is the case, that the divorced woman is sort of the forgotten woman in many churches?
Mhm. Well, I think
Maybe not forgotten, but
yeah.
ignored.
Well, that's even a better point. The When it comes to betrayal and problematic sexual behavior, a lot of church, the bigger, larger church community, that's why we spend a lot of time trying to educate people. They just don't understand it. They're not educated. They think that their past training is the perfect way to do it, and it's just not. And so they don't know how to handle women in this space. If they can't, if you can't park them into a box that says pray about it and get over it, then the pastoral community doesn't know what to do with them. And it's sort of a taboo subject to walk into a church and say, hey, I'm divorcing because my husband's with hookers and is looking at pornography, whatever that space might be. It just nobody wants to hear that. And we need to really change that dynamics to it's everywhere and learn
Yeah.
how to try to embrace them.
I wonder if there's a way, and maybe part of that education is being able to say, because you mentioned the woman whose husband had died, and you are going through a divorce, is um, in both instances the removal of the husband from the relationship was not on you.
Correct. Good point.
Like the wife whose husband physically died, she had no control over that. You you had no control over your husband's behaviors that were betraying the relationship. And I wonder if we could help to try to say that's the commonality between these wives. And
Mm-hmm.
in one way, obviously
Yep.
there's differences there, but still, it's like, can we show similar compassion and care for a wife who did not choose this?
That's the choice piece. That's the word that needs to be incorporated, because the faith community will say, well, you did have a choice. You could have worked harder on it. You could have prayed more about it. You could have gone to therapy. You could have been more accepting. You could, whatever the couldas were, instead of accepting that if a woman has made a choice for divorce, we have to honor her for that. We don't want to traumatize her further by questioning her decision. I think it's really important that the faith community recognize that if uh, Christ-centered woman chooses divorce, it is the last place that she wants to go. This is not a frivolous
Mm-hmm.
choice. This is like she has gone to the pit and the bottom of the barrel and just can't figure out any other way to get out. So,
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier, as women are going through this process, as either they're going through a divorce or they are already divorced and kind of continuing this journey of healing, about really trying to be very practical in a lot of the tools and things. I wanted to see if we could maybe address four key areas of a woman's journey in this. And I'll just state them here. They're real common, but it'd be like, what does healing and recalibration look like physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally? Now, you've touched on a little bit of this in terms of the APSATS kind of three-stage thing, but what I was wondering is if you could maybe share with our audience what are some really maybe key, even practical tools or processes that help in each one of these areas for a wife. And I know that depending on what stage she's in, she might need different things physically or emotionally or relationally. But those are areas that come to the top of my mind in terms of thinking, if somebody is devastated with this traumatic stress and this traumatic burden, what does it look like to come through that physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally to the other side where there is the stability and there is the reconnecting and all of that? But are there some tools, some exercises, some things that you find especially helpful in any one of those or all of those areas?
I'm going to, yes. So I think what I'd like to do, I'm going to start with spiritually, because I think that is one of the heaviest spaces, especially for this target audience. The first thing that I would encourage women to do if they're going through this kind of a heavy navigating separation and or divorce is to understand that God's there. They don't have to feel obligated to spend that same 30 minutes in prayer or devotion. I'm like going against the church community. I don't want to get myself in trouble. But what they need to understand is that God understands their fatigue, their darkness, their heaviness, and it's okay. If you can't get up the energy to sit and pray with the Lord, it's okay. He's praying for you. He has got you. He's just holding you. He gets it. And to give yourself peace and not judge yourself for shifting how you're in devotion with God. A lot of women that I've worked with and talked to is that they say that they feel the most in touch with the Lord in these darkest moments. They're not doing, the Bible studies and all that stuff, but they can feel it in at night when they're crawling into bed. They know, God, I know you're here. This is terrible. And and it's okay to be angry with God too. Just be in that space. You'll come through it at the other end with a much more genuine, vulnerable experience with the Lord. So that would be my first place. Give yourself grace as you wander through sort of this navigation and just listen to God. He'll tell you how to be with him, how to pray with him, what that looks like. From a physical standpoint, it would just be rest. Give your brain the opportunity to rest. This is sort of counterintuitive again to listening to podcasts, we're doing all the workbooks and everything. I almost recommend sometimes for my clients, if your brain's in overdrive, give yourself the opportunity to play video games for 15 minutes. It's okay. Play Tetris. Anything that's going to kind of settle your brain down so that you can rechannel. Bilateral music is a fantastic opportunity to really reset and calm your nerves. You can type it online, bilateral music. Wear little headsets for it. I use it for brain spotting. It's used in EMDR. That's a really great thing to do. If you can move, any kind of movement physically that you can do, stand up, put your feet in the grass outside, hug your dog, anything that just kind of gets a little bit of movement. Hugs from children are awesome too. So that would be spiritually, physically. From an emotional standpoint, I can't say this enough that clients really need to get into group. It is one of the fastest, quickest ways for you to find that someone gets you authentically. Groups need to be very specific if you're divorcing and going through betrayal trauma because you don't quite fit into some of the other groups. I offer a free group every other Thursday morning for women to kind of pop in, get a feel, meet some friends, and then we kind of dump you into a larger community that allows you the opportunity to keep in touch with women all free. One of the other things that I would recommend is get yourself, if you're going to go through the divorce process, your attorney's not your therapist. Get yourself either a good divorce coach that understands the divorce process or a therapist that kind of understands and can help you navigate both pieces at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be emotionally. No, was that relationally? I can't remember. I think that might have been relationally. Or no, they both kind of blend together,
They
don't
kind
they?
of blend. They cross over. Yeah.
Good. Um, from a relationship standpoint, on the far end, and learning how to reconnect with another partner, if you want to go to that space, the first place is for you to identify within you what gives you your own self joy. Once you get past all the muck and the divorce and all the that's going on, the women that I work with, they come out really aware of who their authentic self is. They're extremely vulnerable. They're some of the safest women you can ever encounter and work with and just hang out with. They're really funny and they laugh a lot, but they know where their core values rest. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
deviate from that. It's okay to be there. Be okay being alone too.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So where do many women in this journey either get stuck, or what are some of the pitfalls to kind of look out for? Sort of the warning signs that they may be coming up against an obstacle or something, because like we've said, this is a very hard journey. But are there any things that you would say uh, are key areas where you've seen a lot of wives just either get stuck or feel like I can't go any further?
Yeah. Fatigue. It's when you come into this space, you have to understand it's a marathon. It's not going to go fast. Clients would come in, they're like, I contacted my attorney and they haven't responded back in 24 hours because I try to do that. Um, that's not how the law, that's not how the legal system works. And
Hmm.
to kind of get them into a space where we can use however long it's going to take for them to get to the other end, use it for your own self healing, for your take that time to prepare yourself for the exit. A lot of times women will just get really, really frustrated and tired and give up. I don't want any money from them. I don't need support. I don't need help. And they give up financially a lot because they're tired of the battle instead of recognizing that they're worth it. That their future, when they're 60, when they're 70, when they're 80, they actually need support. They need some kind of financial help, especially what I find very common in our faith community is that these women homeschooling or don't have jobs. There's nothing to balance them out in the future, and to really kind of rest in that space. You do deserve to be taken care of, and how can we do that for you? So that's the
Yeah.
biggest piece that I see them getting stuck in is just fatigue.
One other thing I want to touch on, and maybe this is all part of kind of also that reconnecting stage, is I was just actually talking with Gigi the other day about this, about how, in all of our seasons of either recovery or healing and all this, there's always going to be moments and even some seasons where there's a need for really, really specialized help. And usually what that turns out to is like, man, this is really specific to my situation or this particular stage that I'm at in the journey. But how important is it that the sort of collective community of all women who have experienced betrayal of some kind be able to still sort of cross pollinate and continue to connect together so that it doesn't become segmented with, only married women who have gone through betrayal trauma and then sort of this separate divorced women who have gone through betrayal trauma, and never the two shall mix. Like, I don't know if I'm asking the question right, but how can we continue on the journey where there needs to be specialized help, but also realize we need to be able to help people across all of these lines at some point. What are your thoughts on that? And again, I could be wrong on this. I just
Mm-hmm.
wonder, how do we work toward the larger community of all women who've experienced this, even if their stories don't match up?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess what kind of comes to mind is that when you have an entire population that's in trauma, it's really hard to get everybody to think rationally. And
Mhm.
perhaps after they kind of come through that space, it's still I when you have couples that have worked hard to get out and get through it together, and then couples where it didn't work, they're just both in entirely different spaces and they almost tend to trigger each other a little bit. But I think once they come out of the hard, heavy work, they are okay. Oh, yeah. Well, I had that issue too, but my relationship didn't work out. And everybody can kind of blend on that space. But I don't think it's I don't see it being very effective while everybody's sort of in the mud trying to get out together.
Yeah. And I guess maybe I was asking more around how do we build, and I guess some of this is as you are healing, how do we also just grow in our empathy? So that, because I deal with this even in men's recovery groups all the time, where you've got some guy over here that, he comes in and he's checking in for the week and he's like, man, he's on cloud nine because his marriage is working out and all this kind of stuff. And this guy over here, he's like withering because this guy's celebrating and this guy just, got papers served to him or whatever. And so we're constantly navigating that of, hey, don't lose your zeal of celebration, but also read the room and realize people aren't always in the same situation, and vice versa. The person that's saying, relationships suck and marriage sucks and all that's terrible. It's like, well, realize there's some people that are having a different experience. That's all I'm saying is like,
Yeah.
how can we have more empathy? And
Yeah.
I realize that doesn't, like you said, that's a later maybe discovery that you reach along the way when deep healing has occurred.
Well, when I look at women in that kind of situation, I hear what you're saying is that the women whose relationships have been saved and are in a good space, they do, I think, feel grief and empathy for those relationships that haven't been saved. And then the women whose relationships haven't worked out, it's almost a reminder of the grief.
Mm.
I didn't get there. Whatever. It's not their fault, but it's just like I really wish I could have had that. So it brings a little, I think, more sadness to those women trying to struggle on it because it doesn't end. They
Hmm.
go through the divorce and they're still trying to make money and support their family and their kids and whatever that looks
And
like.
this may be I may be chasing a rabbit here too, but how much of that do you think is related to how much of an idol we have made of marriage in the church?
Oh, I think it's a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. When we start idolizing the marriage instead of the people involved in the marriage, it's a problem.
Because what if these two women who are in different relationship statuses could see each other as just two women,
Yeah.
not one married and one divorced, right? It
Yeah.
goes back to your original question of like, hey, we've got these two women who have faced a loss, and can we just see them as two women that are in a state of loss and hurt and pain and grief? And anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. But um, my last question is a biggie. I hinted at it earlier, but just where is hope along this journey? Like, how can a woman have hope as she's going through just really maybe the darkest season in her life?
Two different ways. The first is it's going to sound flippant and I don't mean it this way, but when we are Christians and we grow and we want to become more like what Christ wants us to be throughout our lives, betrayal trauma sort of speeds up the process. So it's no longer a 30-year, let me get authentic. It's, I got to get authentic in the next 12, 24 months or I'm not going to survive. So I think that's kind of neat that the women at the end of kind of healing through the betrayal trauma in that third phase, they really know themselves no matter where they are, no matter who they are. They're like, oh, I'm going to be authentic. I got me. I know I'm not going to change. This is what's really important and valuable to me. So I think that's really important that they are now stronger typically in their own identity. And that's a piece of hope. The other hope the other hope is that they are able to really enjoy things differently in their life instead of feeling if you're exiting a relationship from divorce, is that there's a whole lot of freedom involved and not having to navigate your entire life and walk on eggshells or be afraid that your husband's who's not in good recovery is going to mess up again. Or it's freeing. And some of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, I see that time and time and time and time again, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much they struggle financially, no matter what kind of father they're dealing with the kids or ex-husband, the freedom, it puts them on top of everything. It is just a liberating experience for them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this has been a great conversation, Kim. Where can people go to learn more about you, or what resources would you like to share with our audience?
Well, you can go to Coaching Hope for You, Coaching Hope, the number 4, letter U, to my website. And I just published a workbook for partners who are going through betrayal trauma and divorcing at the same time. It's very small and easy to manage and easy to read. And I offer groups for that. That's called Not a Casserole Widow. You can also go to notacasserolewidow.com and find some more opportunities in that area. If you go to my website, Coaching Hope for You, there's a resource space that's got all kinds of resources for couples trying to stay together or separate. I do IRCM. I'm trained and certified to do IRCM, early recovery couples empathy model kind of healing with a coupleship. And I also do therapeutic disclosures. So there's sort of a vast way of meeting and finding out who I am. And so I'm hoping
Yeah.
that
Well,
help.
that's great. We're going to put a lot of stuff in the show notes so people can, click through and get those resources and connect with you. But Kim, thank you again for being willing to be open with your story, and also for entering into this space to help so many other wives and women as they face this kind of journey of betrayal, trauma, healing. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, listeners and viewers, like I said, we're going to put a lot of info in the show notes to help you out on this journey. Our goal is to help you take your next best step towards wholeness in Christ. And so please reach out to us. And we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.